Welcome to the U.S. Chamber of Cannabis podcast. I'm your host, Scott Goddard. I go by the Professor.
And I'm Keegan McHenry. They call me Mac.
And thanks for joining us today, everybody out there. Now, in this episode, we have an amazingly unique guest on the show, but maybe a better word for him is a potentially living cannabis legend. So let me take a moment to introduce a man who in 2015 was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame, a two-time unanimous All-American running back and 1998 Heisman Trophy winner, and ex-NFL pro and creator of the HIGHSMAN cannabis lifestyle brand. A massive welcome to Ricky Willams to the show. Thank you very much for joining us today, Ricky.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny, the introduction is that as soon as you said, Cannabis Hall of Fame, and then you said anything related to sports, it's like everybody's already gonna know who you're talking about.
I bet it's a short list of people we can really include who both have done important things in cannabis and also been a beast as far as the physical acumen goes, especially. Now, what we like to do in interview shows before we get into the main show is we run a small segment called the High Five. 5 quick questions concerning cannabis. Gotta love the consonants there. So if you're ready, Ricky, I'll start off with the first of 5. What is your favorite way to consume cannabis?
I love to roll joints and smoke joints.
Smoking the bones way.
Yeah.
Man, I'm after my own heart.
Yeah, and I haven't always been like that. It's like kind of, how I grew up in cannabis was everybody like smoked blunts. So it's kind of how something is introduced to you. It's your entree into it, and so, that's what we did. And it just became kind of what I did. And then as I had a friend of mine, a teammate I played with, and he kind of made a joke. He said, "We're too old to smoke blunts." First I was like, "No, we're not," and then it kind of sunk in, and I was like, "Yeah, maybe I am." And so I signed up for the Ganjier program. And I spent some time with the OGs and heard them like just watched them and was around them and heard the way they talked about the experience. And I fell in love with the process of rolling a joint and smoking a joint. It's funny, like the more you learn to appreciate something, it becomes easier to appreciate and you get more out of it. And so, even learning to be more sensitive to the different flavors and the different smells and the different effects, it gives you greater access to the potential that the plant has. And so, appreciating the process of really paying attention to smoking a joint and how the flavors and the experience changes as you move down the joint, different terpenes are released at different temperatures, different combinations. And so it's just such a rich process that it's become my favorite way to consume.
Right on. Yeah, I'd say Philadelphia market guy myself. Blunts were all over the place. The old Philly blunt box race to the bottom kind of thinking was a lot of my entryway to it. But I sucked at rolling for so long. I just depended on the kindness of strangers. Like, could you just roll this up for me a little bit? Yeah, you can keep Roller's Roach. Right? I was like, you can keep the Roach, of course, as I know the politeness. But I could say at this point, I can roll a J that would smoke.
Yeah, that's what's important.
I still got the blunt hands. I can make it look like there's no seam on it. So that's a great answer for it.
And then, it's true. I enjoy, and I became a very proficient blunt roller, but rolling joints, I had to take it to the next level. And I feel like rolling joints is one of those things that you can get better at your entire life.
Yeah,
it's an art.
I like those kinds of things.
Yeah, a good ray. You always know you started somewhere, but it never stops.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that kind of thing. We'll move on to question 2. Mac, fire it off. For us.
Combining two of your loves of football and cannabis, if you had to describe your game as a strain of cannabis, what strain do you think you most closely played like?
And like a real OG. I mean, like the old school, like real California OG, because it like it hits you and you kind of feel like dazed for a little bit. No, and I think for the defensive player, that was the experience I was trying to give them. You know?
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think that one definitely hits pretty hard, pretty intense. I think it's a great answer. That's awesome.
Stiff arm to the throat.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And kind of continuing with that theme of just like following your career and knowing how much the NFL travels, was there like what were the best cities for cannabis culture, even during your career or even post that when you come back to where I feel like Philadelphia is such a sports knowledgeable town. Like Philly fans love their Philly teams. And I think that even kind of transfers over into their love of cannabis and how they consume and the passion for which they advocate for it or defend their favorite strains. Are there any other cities or towns that you've played in that kind of have a similar, feel for cannabis?
I think because of regulations in our country, certain markets, it was so illegal that they weren't really even in the conversation. And on the flip side, because California was so far ahead in regulating cannabis that, you knew that when you were in California, there was just more,
Right,
and
right.
the quality was gonna be better. So, I remember when I was in, and I'm sure if people pay attention, if they go back and they look at the NFL schedules, that when I was in Baltimore, we flew out. It's a long flight. But we flew out to play the Chargers, and we flew out a day early. Okay, big mistake. Okay, right? We got beat so bad, and I think part of it was because they weren't used to smoking so much and that quality,
Right.
So yeah. So for me, I grew up in San Diego, so I have to say San Diego first.
Right.
No,
Of course.
and it fits. But I would say, honestly, Oakland.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like I love talking about cannabis to people from Oakland. I love it. Love it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think that tracks as well. I'm from Seattle, so I was thinking Seattle, like it's not as vivacious as like the Raiders fans. Like you can't take a Raiders fan and compare it to a Seahawks fan, even though that cannabis culture and that progression is still there. I think that's a really good like equivocation. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And they don't have an NFL team, but they have a pretty good college football team, and because the brand we're in Oregon, Eugene.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oregon's a
Eugene is
special
great.
place. Oregon's a special place. It has a very special place in my heart, and it's like the most variety of cultivars. It's like they really pride themselves. It's a really beautiful market. I think over 75% of adults in Oregon consume cannabis.
Yeah.
It's a vibe.
Yeah, it really is. Eugene's a wonderful place. That's awesome.
Wow, that's a thick a thick amount of percentage of people. I don't know if I've ever heard of an area that really hits 75%. That means everybody. Because half of them just won't be honest. And of course, some are kids, assumably.
I think that's adult population.
Yeah. That's awesome.
It's funny. So I was on a podcast earlier today on Fox, and this Kennedy Saves the World. And I was like, Fox, and we're talking about cannabis. I was like, this ain't gonna be fun. And she starts talking, and she's like really liberal and open-minded when she's talking about cannabis. And I'm thinking, this is weird. And then she's like, yeah, I grew up in Oregon. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll do it.
It's a good candidate. So for the fourth of the high five questions, what's your go-to munchies when you get high? What's your favorite thing to eat?
Honestly, whatever the wife is put in the cabinets. And so graham crackers. Raid the baby's food. Yeah, graham crackers. I mean, that's
Have you ever tried the like old wives' tales of like if you eat mangoes with cannabis, you get like a effect which sort of stacks on itself?
Yeah,
the myrcene hack.
The
Is
myrcene, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the myrcene. Yeah, mangoes. But it's interesting, it's like anything, right? You have a person, or one of your friends, and they're a certain way, but when the other friends are around, they kind of act a little bit different. I feel like terpenes are like that too, depending on how they're organized. They express different parts of themselves.
Oh, I totally agree. I always think of it like I think of terpenes like a TV picture, because I think everybody has a favorite. That's sort of just the way we like to conditionalize things when we have a grouping. But I would hate to have a TV that's only blue or only yellow, or like so much yellow I can't see the picture. And every once in a while, there's products that come out so terpene rich and like it's a one note song that I go like, if you only have 4 colors, you're not going to see as good of a picture if it doesn't have as much color as possible. And it might be the same amount of color, but if you rearrange it, it's a different picture. So I agree, like the timing, the tempo, and of course the recipe, it all changes the picture, even though it might be the same amount.
Yeah.
It's a much different the way that it comes across, like you said, the beginning versus the end of the joint or the middle, or even the roach changes the picture, even with the same colors.
Yeah. That's interesting. Like, I prefer more sativa leaning cultivars, and I love hazes, but the ones that are like too strong and terpenoline, it's like too racy. But the ones that have that fruity sweet, that kind of grounded a little bit, that's my sweet spot.
Terpenoline is one of those, I swear it has like a two-face. Yeah. Sometimes it like knocks me out, but sometimes it is like you said, like just racy, quick movement in the eyes. Absolutely can be overstimulating if it's done interestingly. But for the last of the 5, Ricky, what's your sign?
Oh, wow. So it's an interesting question, because I'm an astrologer. And so conventional astrology, I would say I'm a Gemini, but from what I know about astrology, my sign is I'm a Cancer.
Really? Awesome. Keegan, what's your sign? Let's throw it all out here. Let's all get friendly with it.
I'm a Scorpio. I got that stinging tail, man.
Yeah.
What about you, Scotty?
I'm a classic Libra. I'm measured.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right, now I got my questions for you. Okay.
Yeah.
So Scorpio, one of the aspects of Scorpio is treachery. Okay. So what is the most treacherous thing that you feel comfortable sharing right now that you've done?
Ooh, the most treacherous thing.
Damn good question.
I think the most treacherous thing that I'm willing to admit is
there we go. Real Scorpio. Gotta have secrets.
Is that I played college and professional ice hockey, and before I left, the girl that I was talking to totally just, when I moved, forgot to tell her that I was moving and just like left, and then had to be like on the road, like, hey, I'm moving 4 or 5 states away. Sorry.
Well, here's the thing though, it's not treacherous if it's something you just forgot. If you're more honest about why you did it, then that's revealing the treachery.
I just felt that in that moment, that's probably the most guilty I've ever felt, of like, you got to be better than that, Keegan. Like, pick it up.
No, but what I'm saying is, like, why didn't you say anything to
her? I would say it was more just because like it wasn't like an official dating thing. So it was just like to me, in my eyes, I should say, very casual. Of like, hey, if we maybe even see each other once a week, it's not, that relationship hasn't been built where I felt like in a special attachment to be like, hey, I'm making this life decision. It may affect you. Yeah. It was more just like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do for the sake of what I feel I need to do. Yeah. And it just wasn't on my list of, whatever I needed to do to make that happen to let you know.
Yeah, I get it. And this is one of the issues, obviously, that Scorpios have to figure out, because there's there's a need to live at a certain intensity. And if other people around you, don't appreciate that, and we're not likely to share the intensity because we've scared so many people away, so we kind of hide it, but it's going to come out anyway, right?
Right, it's there.
Yeah. And so a big thing with Scorpios and I don't, I don't often suggest people of the same sign like interact with each other or like be together in a relationship, but there is something specific about Scorpio, is at least some recognition of how intense and how real we really would like to live. Because that invites us to actually not have to hide so much.
Right, exactly. You want to,
and then we don't have to be treacherous, right? If we can just, right?
Yeah, if I can be honest about my intentions, you might not like my intentions, but then it will prevent,
the treachery
pain down the
treachery. Yes,
down the road.
yes, exactly. Right. Okay, yeah. See, it's useful stuff, right?
Absolutely, it is.
Okay, now the Libra's on the hot seat. Okay, so so one of the things with Libra is the scales, like keeping things balanced. Okay,
Obsessed with it.
Yeah, but sometimes we sacrifice too much in order to keep the scales balanced. Okay. Any examples come to mind?
I believe that it's probably the central condition to my living, and the central conflict is the difference between focusing or the consideration which creates balance, like filling your mind with more than one thing, because the cost is possibly a detriment to focus, because then if I'm always willing to consider the balancing effect, I technically weaken my focus or my connection to possibly what I was doing before that moment. So I say in my life, and we talked about only briefly, I think last time we got to see each other, like focus versus attention. And to me, I think there's times where I feel so focused on something right as I'm about to open the door of opportunity, right as my hand gets ever closer to the doorknob. It's almost like the same pulls of a magnet. The closer you get, the more it forces you away, because the consideration I might have has to be for the opposite. And I'd say, strange enough, being a loving balance, I'm also like a natural contrarian. So then as I approach balance, the opposite will happen. I'll be like, no, force your balance towards like a more unilateral approach. And so I oscillate very quickly. I'd say manic in the opinions of others, but for me, it's like just the speed I'm at between grabbing the doorknob and running towards the window and running back to the door, making sure like you don't miss anything. But I want 100% everything that I do. Balance, I don't see as being 50-50. I see it as just moving quickly between 100% of everything I can do. But it's, I mean,
this is right. This is right. That's a good starting point, but the thing about being a Libra, it means your whole entire life, is going to be about the balance. And one way to do it is like, I think of a seesaw. Someone's in a seesaw and they're running back and they're running back and forth, right? They can do it because they're fast, right? And it works, and people are like, that's cool, but I can think of other ways to do it, And so a big, first of all, so you said focus and
versus like awareness or attention.
Awareness, okay. So this idea of versus, that's one manifestation of the scales, right? This versus this, But if it's verse, then it has to be, I take this perspective, and then I have to run really fast and take this perspective, Then I got to run really fast and take this perspective, right? And that, again, that's kind of a version of that. But if you really think about the balance in the scales, it's really about integration. It's about seeing what these two things have in common, how these two things complement each other. And if you really think about like the old balance scales, you got an ounce of gold dust, right? And you have lead here, and you're trying to find that right amount, and you're sprinkling a little bit of dust, and you're going back and forth and back and forth, and back and forth, and then oh yes, we got a deal. So it's because the energy has to run, right? So the scales are always going to be there, but our perspective of how we want to engage in expressing that's on us. And that's where our creativity comes in. And so when you can really appreciate that the beauty of Libra, right, is that they can hold two perspectives at the same time, right, and can give us the information about how these two things, right, harmonize together, how they go together, okay? But if we get stuck in the versus, and that's more of a masculine thing, you know, if we get stuck in the versus, then we're always in conflict. We're always in conflict. But if we can appreciate the idea of balance, right? Because on the scale, right, that's 1 ounce of gold and 1 ounce of lead, right? And they're equal, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I love the scale as like the vehicle of metaphor. And it's something that I think about cannabis as well, because the idea, obviously, homeostasis and balance comes into play.
Yeah.
And I have a big fight because I am very anti-mathematical balance. I don't believe it exists. We've created like a theme. We say 100%, we say 50-50, but we're just describing nature. I don't think nature exists in a mathematical way. It's just an easy way to categorize it. So I always think of that scale, and I think, is anybody happy if the scale is stuck in the middle? It's like the funnest part of the scale is the fact that it's dynamic and it moves down and up. So in my mind, people believe that balancing on 1 foot means you are stable and your foot is exactly where it needs to be. But when you look at a person's ankle, it's constantly adjusting and moving, making, exactly like you said, small dust adjustments to their position to keep them stable. And so I think about balance as being that more of a constant than holding your breath. And so then I thought about how the body works and thought our bodies are never truly balanced, because when I'm walking, I transition from 100% left to 100% right and back. So
there is one time when it's balanced, when we're dead.
Right. Which we don't want to rush that. Right. Yeah, the one unchanging state with the right strain. But I thought like breathing in the same. If we did mathematical breathing, you would just hold your breath. But real breathing is breathing out as completely as you can and breathing in as completely as you can. And so as I kind of developed through life from more of a mathematical scholastic version of living to a more organic one, and thankfully I had 3 older sisters and no brothers, so I was able to get great influence from very amazing women. I saw that it's oscillation. It's a rhythm. It's like the bass drum isn't just on, it hits in a rhythm. Every year has 4 seasons, not just one long season. Well, at least where we live.
Yeah.
I know there's some places where it's a lot more consistent, but I think that creates dynamics. And to me, dynamic means possibility of change, possibility of growth, and growth, if it's right, the possibility of actual progress, you know, to the individual, whatever they define it as. So I'd say I started out combatively on the scales because of math. And now it feels more like paradoxes are the truth. If you find 2 things that are opposite,
that's Libra.
They're not in conflict. They actually are in congress, because without the other thing, you'd never get rest. You would never be able to go to sleep. You would be up all day long just wearing it out. So I feel that I've moved ever more towards organic balance, what the planet describes, recovery and things, as opposed to just on off. And it's been a massive help in just being able to really, even in understanding cannabis and everything, see the depth of what it can do and present. Like the dissociation, it isn't a threat. It's great because sometimes you're just so overconnected, you can welcome it instead of some people getting paranoid. It's like, no, this is freedom, a field without fences, scare some people, but it's also open to any idea. Everything can be planted, kind of thing.
Oh, that is so beautiful, right? That's the energy of Libra, you know, art, beauty, balance. Exactly. This is great. This is a great example. So thank you.
I appreciate that. My wife actually does tarot readings. She is massively in. I mean, if the camera's in the other room, I'd be surrounded by just every type of mineral you'd ever hear of. And she's brilliant at it and has an abnormal quality that she's dealt with her whole life, but finally found where it blooms. So it's something that my original mathematical format wasn't great at, but I've, thank God, been able to be influenced by others to understand things beyond my scope.
This idea of Libra also connected to relationship and just what you talked about, the openness to be influenced by another. Okay. And this is what, you know, kind of where I started with the kind of when what Libra looks like as it's trying to figure it out. Right, because when we first start the scale, we're like
all
this.
over the place.
Right, but the
looks like me trying to weigh weed when I was a teenager. It's just fucking all over the place, spilling on your lap and shit.
So it's about finding the right person to open ourselves up to, because their influence is going to bring us into more harmony, more balance.
And then for me, because of such a strong Libra, situations were unbalanced originally felt like threats, because it was like, no, I'm not safe without balance. And I realized the concept of balance and the presence of balance are not on the same level. So I'm complaining about a book concept instead of welcoming the world as it is presented to me. And it was, I mean, years of life, right? Just combating in between ideas until you realize it was always this way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a friend today, and we were talking about why a lot of guys are not into astrology, and and a lot of it is because they haven't, because usually a lot of women that are into astrology, they kind of use it to decide why the relationship is not going to work, or why, why
like a management
why
strategy.
you're a rascal, so guys are like, screw that, I don't want to, but so I get it. And what I've seen since I've started, becoming more public about how much I love it and how useful I think it is, like 90% of the people that book readings with me are men now. And so I'm starting to have more and more conversations, and 99% of them have, like, it's their first conversation they've ever had about astrology.
Wow.
And so I'm having this really empowering, amazing experience where I'm able to bridge my love for football and their admiration for me to something that to me is like, football is great, but it's not going to change anyone's life. It's not going to give anyone a greater perspective on who they are. If anything, it just distracts them so they don't have to think about it. And so I don't know, it's just been really amazing. But I think, like, as guys, this is a good example of like how it can be useful. It's a language that allows us to like talk about the things that we just think about all the time, but we don't have the language to talk about, And it's simple, like even just the idea of like we playing with this idea of a scale, and how we took a constellation or something you see in a magazine, and we turned it into like a meaningful point of connection and insight and depth.
Yeah, and it's non-mathematical in the way that most of our language prescribes, like math. It has to be orderly, but we don't experience ourselves in an orderly way. So if we always have to describe yourself by cause, effect, beginning, middle, end, it makes it very difficult to describe problems which are atonal to time or atonal to experience. They're things that bother your whole life, or things that you've always visited as like a constant thought location, kind of. And then I can't apply linear thinking to it. So how am I supposed to structure a sentence where somebody's going to believe what I experienced was true or useful to them, the communication? And then for me, I have especially, the poetry of language in that way, being able to say more with words than just what the science of management or defines it as. It's because we don't experience the world as language, but we just use it as best as we can. And I think I've been able to, through talk to my wife in different head states, because she doesn't consume, so she just experiences the world in that way naturally. I'm like, sometimes you need something to help get to that flexibility of the mind. But what an incredible poetry to experience, to finally know, like, it isn't just trying to fight for lottery numbers or what's going to happen next week in my horoscope. It's, I was born as this. I don't have to worry about what I become. Just like you said, what's the experience like being born as you? Because so much of our experience is interpreted through what I am to others specifically first.
Well, because the big thing is like the thing that you are most equipped to be is yourself. And so once you tune into being you, you become really, really good at it. It's right. I'm telling you, it alleviates all the confidence issues, right? Confidence issues, because you shouldn't be confident that you can be somebody else. That's not a good thing,
Yeah, I literally have on this whiteboard here full of rantings and writings. Very bottom, you can only succeed in life as you.
Yeah.
It's like, I'd be a shitty other people. It'd probably look okay sometimes.
Yeah,
but
exactly. It wouldn't feel good, And to me, I learned, like, I was really good at like playing the part, but when I go home and look in the mirror, I couldn't do it. I had to, so I had to look in the mirror and say, is this really what I want to be doing with my life? And it was scary when I was like, no, no. And so, it's something that you said, for me, I was, I didn't start consuming cannabis until I was in my 20s. And so I kind of was always living on that wavelength and had access to it. And it wasn't that I don't have access to it when I'm not consuming cannabis, but it's always pushing the limit of how I can have access to more of it.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like when I consume, I think of it as work, you know, like I'm trying to get to something.
Yep.
You know,
not just party.
Yeah, it's a tool, and it's funny. Like it took a while for it to like click that that's what was going on, because what I was told and what, you know, I got suspended. So I was told that I was doing something wrong, and the assumption was, whatever the assumption is, why we're not supposed to be doing it. I don't even remember anymore. But the assumption that I was doing something wrong. But my experience was, what I was doing was making me a better person. And so it put me in this situation where I had to choose, do I have to keep moving into being more myself and being a better person? Or do I follow these stupid rules to keep destroying my body, you know? And
Right.
for me, like my internal experience is, that's a really easy decision to make.
Right.
It seems very easy to think about, at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You're right. I mean, it was in the moment, my heart was racing and I was like, what the hell am I doing? But there was a voice in there of like, you know, I guess my soul or my guardian angel was like, dude, you need to take care of you or it's not going to end well. Oh, thank God I listened.
Well, you know, it plays into one of the questions I had here, because as I was trying to do some research, right, and find a clever way to ask something, in the wiki article about you, it mentioned something about when you were a kid, and it said, I guess, maybe from a different interview or something, you self-reported that you had a lot of anger, a lot of energy expressed through the anger. And then you took a test when you were around 6, it said, and it showed that your mental development was unique.
Yeah.
So really off the back of that, because that struck me as a very interesting piece of information to get that young. Did you consistently, because as you said, you felt like you've had abnormal access to those like hard to speak about kind of things and qualities.
Yeah.
Did you feel that access in your awareness continually, or was it just like revealed as you developed? Did you feel even as early as 6 that you were like, my life's going to be a little different than the lives I've been presented around me? Or was it?
I didn't know any different. So I was like, I was born that way, you know, but even because I didn't know any different, for me, it was more shocking that other people didn't think that about themselves, you know? And I think the end result was I started to doubt it, because I was like, it feels real, but no one else seems to think. Oh my God. No one else seems to get it, but so maybe I'm crazy, but I couldn't escape what I felt to be real, you know? Even today sometimes, you know, because, you know, I look around and like, I'm like, no one seems to think, you know, so people seem to think that pretending is the only thing that they can. People seem to think that pretending is the only choice that they have. And they even have reasons and justifications why they're not themselves. And I'm like, I don't think it's a good idea to create reasons and justifications for not being yourself. I think it's more of thinking of ways that you can make shifts in your life that make it easier to be yourself. That seems like a better use of energy, but that's just me.
Yeah, this one lady on a recent plane flight, she'd gone through a lot of grief, but a comment that she said, which I thought was just brilliant, because it stopped me from talking for a while just to contemplate. She said, to go forward, you must go inward.
Yeah.
And I thought in that same way, it's a lot of people do an extroverted. They're like, to move forward, I have to convince others.
Yeah.
I have to make the excuses and prove everything I do, instead of looking into self. And this one YouTube channel, this very brilliant guy had mentioned that a lot of the conditions in school, we're not taught to communicate. We're just only asked things that people already know. So everything is in the premise of a test lesson where they're like, well, the teacher already knows the capital of France. So her asking you is arbitrary to your knowledge. It's constant proofing. But as we move into adulthood, that feeling doesn't leave. So every time people want to step out and express themselves or just accentuate their life with a new behavior, they have to first answer all of the people who've told them, what are you doing? What do you want to be when you grow up? No, not what do you want to be? How do you want to make money is really what I'm asking. But like, let me gaslight you as a kid a little bit, so you never feel like you can say who you are. You're always trying to say the right answer according to another person you know is looking for it, but will never give you the ability to work through it. It's like, no, perform immediately. And I just see that quality go into, you know, professionalism, into how people look at marriage and other relationship development. It's like, but I did it right. but I did it right. You can't
Yeah.
yell at me because I did it right. And it's like,
Yeah.
I just am looking for you to be you. What's right? Just be you. You know, it's such an interesting distraction.
It's a wound, you know, like it's a collective wound, you know. And I think it's something that we have to come together in order to be able to heal together. And you know, when I think of cannabis as medicine, this is the kind of medicine, because it allows us to get space so that we can recognize where we're doing that, and it empowers us to be able to choose to do something different.
Well said. Well said. I love this kind of shit, especially. I'm going to throw it over to Keegs for the next question for it. Keegs, throw it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So saying that you said you didn't start using cannabis until your early 20s, all through like high school and junior high, even as young as elementary school, at least for me, where I grew up, we were a part of like the DARE program, and we were exposed to all these different types of stigmas and all those kind of things. When you were growing up and being from California, and especially progressive area, was it presented to you differently as a child that you think made you think about it differently from an early age? Or how did you interact with those kind of programs and stigmas when you were growing up?
Yeah, you know, I kind of was talking earlier about the woman Kennedy and growing up in Oregon, you know.
Mhm.
So I think kind of where you grow up definitely like determines how you interact and how you understand things, obviously. And so we had the DARE program, you know, and they said it, but also when I go home, you know, my stepdad, who I respected a lot, he was a Rasta. And so,
Right.
you know, I saw what I was hearing at school, and I saw my personal experience. I noticed that when he was smoking, he was cool.
Right. Right. I think that's really, really
Yeah.
interesting. Like
And
Scott grew up.
and my favorite auntie, Sheila, same thing. You know, I love, like, she's one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. Love her, love her, love her. So, you know, and it kind of comes back to what we were saying earlier. It puts you in a position where you have to lie about your lived experience because of the, you know, you
Right.
got because what people are putting on you. And it starts early, you know.
Yeah, I always remember growing up in Washington. Obviously, never really demonized that drastically. Even my parents saying, like, if I have to pick between the two of them, I'd much rather you be involved in cannabis than alcohol. Like, they're like, it ruins so many less lives, like all these different things. Uh, but then I would talk to my friends that grew up on the East Coast, and Scott, you can definitely attest to this. Of it was never portrayed that way, of like that it's acceptable, that there aren't anything worse than cannabis, all of these different kind of things. It's that California, that Washington, that Oregon. I think the way that it was introduced to me at a young age, it was never a big deal. I didn't feel this like I was doing anything that wrong, which now when I have moved out here to the East Coast, even working in a cannabis market, it's getting better, but it's still a taboo thing. Going home for Thanksgiving is a million questions from people that don't get it, like that kind of thing. Like Scott, how was it presented to you as a child?
Oh, well, the son of a two-toured non-vet Marine father. Uh, the funniest thing in his life was, given the 80s and 90s when I was young, it was it was dope. He was don't do dope, and he might have been talking about all of the things at once, just using a great like umbrella term. But the strangest thing for a guy who at that point, I mean, he was born in the 30s, so I was like, you were probably a square during the hippie era, like if you were military based to it. I wouldn't say after his death, but as he kind of went into cognitive decline, I started to clean out his house, and I found, which I still have somewhere in the mess of my closet, a issue of the Quantico Daily, which is like the Marine paper from Quantico, Virginia, where they have a big military base. A picture of him presented on the front page, which I was like, okay, well, obviously he was like technically a war hero for good reasons, like inventions for guns, keeping people safe. But there he was in his after war era speaking about like the protests and everything. And he said, although I understand why people are upset about like the whole conflict in Vietnam, cannabis was one of the best things we had out in the field, because if you have somebody who's suffering from an injury or like crotch rot or foot rot, and you don't have any of the ability to have like a full med tent available or even a medic, like you need the first thing for health is calming somebody down and letting them know that they are okay, because otherwise they're going to bleed out or something bad's going to happen. So it was interesting having a dad who's like, dope is dope and never touch that shit, to then seeing at the time that he was probably a little more, mentally aware, that he was actually like kind of yelling at people like, it's actually one of the best things we have in Vietnam. And given Vietnam weed, I'm sure was phenomenal at that point.
Yeah.
I don't think he necessarily even ever imbibed, but I found enough old pictures in black and white of him like smoking cigarettes, where I was like, you were obviously in that mode. And I'm kind of glad to see that it was more dynamic than just a guy who like white walled it. The white Jewish guy marrying a black lady from Trinidad. I could realize he was a lot more radical about his behavior than maybe he presented to his kids in the 80s, given the Reaganomics of the time. But yeah, so it was absolutely, outside of the realm of reason. Technically, when I got busted by the cops for it was because my dad triggered that action. And so it was definitely a tumult, right? Because it's your family choking you instead of usually, just the law doing it. A lot to have to learn and manage at that point, but in showing kind of his inflexibility in his older years too. So even up to this point, I was going to say there's sometimes in my apartment building I'm in, I'll go do laundry and be in the basement and kind of be like, I used to like look at this and be like, I wonder where I could smoke weed in here, just because it's like a clever spot that they wouldn't expect you to be. Like I could go by the boiler and nobody would smell it. And I go over there by that one vent. Although I do love the journey that weed takes you on when it was illegal, you'd be really clever about location. I went to places I would have never thought of exploring.
Yeah.
But again, like the journey was great, but the stress was never something that I think should be a part of it. You lose more brain cells than you gain from that.
Wow. Yeah. I found a beautiful graveyard in Alaska. I was on a cruise with my daughter, and I was like, I found this beautiful graveyard, and I was right on this hill. Oh, it was sweet.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of those natural settings. I remember there's this one abandoned railroad tracks. You walk down like a mile, you're away from civilization enough, and you can just you bring a guitar, some friends, climb weird trees, and just like the best enjoy and just run around river rocks and stuff. It was like, I'm kind of glad we went away from everybody, but also, boy, isn't this just a result of the stigma? So I think cannabis made it where you can always find something beneficial about the awkwardness, I think, in that way. Made your mind not just feel full of like hate or stress, which is, I think, also just a brilliant way to be able to use it to benefit itself and the user too. Almost.
Do you think that made it feel like any more like special? Like, because now that I can like smoke in my apartment, I can have a movie on, like, it's great. Like I still whatever enjoy it, but when it's still an occasion, like that high feels a little bit better, and it gets a little bit of that nostalgia of going out into the mountains, driving 30 minutes to go smoke 2 joints, like these ridiculous things. But it obviously presented the 3 of us with beautiful natural settings that cannabis was there for. Like, do you think that obviously it enhances the human experience, but now when you go do it, now that it's a little bit more destigmatized, do those occasions now feel any more special to you?
I feel like this, not to be crass, but I feel like this is a question of like sex with your wife. Right? Right. And it's like if the flower is really good, okay, right, it's gonna be good everywhere, okay, right. It kind of, I'm lucky, with my wife, it's really good all the time, so we don't have to be exotic, but
don't have to go to Alaskan graveyards.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly.
That is cool. That is interesting. I'll always say that for better, for worse, I mean, certainly you can form a crop circle and, there's always a pace and time depending on the participants, but something about like you and your mate, whoever relationship it is, but somebody that you can just talk to and trust, driver and passenger seat. I don't know what it is about the combination of not driving a car, because usually in my experience, you get high driving on a trip, you get about a half hour of great things. Then you just really just enjoy the fact you can be silent with somebody and not weird. Cause like, I think that's truly trust. Like we don't have to talk to get along. What a great feeling. But I still think like for some reason, the top of a parking garage, you and your mate sparking one down, like the best fucking conversation, like the most open thinking questions you wouldn't normally ask. I don't know what it is about that condition, but for some reason, at least in my experience, it's been almost dependably Like it's never been ruined by the legality or the ease of cannabis. You put me in a car with somebody in an empty lot, we're just gonna explore like the mind in the best possible.
Been there.
I had a mentor, because I've trained in a lot of different body work, and he would say, he always talked about evolution, and he said, like, as we evolved, whenever like things got bad in one area, we pick up and we'd keep it moving. And so he said, if you're ever in a difficult spot, he said it's impossible to go on a walk with a friend for over an hour, okay, and still be tied in knots, and it's not moving, but kind of the idea of in a car, right? That idea of like we're going somewhere and we're together. Yeah. I think it activates something ancient in us.
Yeah, for some reason, being in like that, like phone booth of the car, it's like everything else is away from us right now. Like we're just going to talk about us, because you're not talking about the car. Like you're never talking about the car, the parking lot. You're always talking about like the world now that you're no longer in it. You can kind of visit it in your mind without having to experience it in the body. Like car yoga, in that kind of way. And I a huge fan of it. I've often thought, right, the cars and celebrities and coffee, I was like, cannabis and cars, and I think is going to be a much better conversation for a lot of folks.
100%.
I think this is a spin-off podcast, car yoga. we're kind of like Be Real hotboxing. Seriously, I think you're onto something.
I think it loosens the mind and gives us access back to ourselves, which I have to love. Well, this is a Keeks question, but I'm going to just throw it out there because you kind of started to allude to one of the topics that we were going to ask about, which is the physicality side of it. And Keegan, I'm going to throw this question kind of to both of you as whoever responds first, because you both played sports at a high level, right? You both were performing where your body was more the thing you depended on. How did cannabis come into play as far as, did it seem just better for recovery, or did it seem like it was actually useful also for training and the mentality that would be a part of performing? Did it ever help performance? Was ever performance enhancing, in the way that they kind of think about things? Just open question out to.
Go for it, Mac.
Well, for me, so I played hockey and I was a goalie, so it was far less physical, unlike the sense of collisions, risk of injury, those kind of things. Being a goalie is much more mental. So I found cannabis gave me a tremendous mental edge. I started using it in a sports sense, like practice and then even games, more towards just after high school, when I would find myself getting more and more anxious as things started to get more and more real, playing these more like high level games, being in front of these people where like my nerves would get to me. And being a goalie, if you're not directly being like the puck in your end, you're just by yourself. It's just you and your thoughts and nothing's happening around you. So you're trying to stay involved in the game, but having cannabis, I think, calmed a lot more nerves for me, which I found to be much more mentally helpful, more than like a physical sense. I don't think it gave me much of a physical edge, if any. I felt the same, but it was definitely more of those downtime moments where I was able to actually just focus and let my mind honestly just go blank, where there was no thoughts of get ready for this or watch out for when they do this. It was just nothing and just pure reaction.
Would you say that's similar to being that it facilitated you getting into the zone?
Yes, 100%. Absolutely. That zone of just pure utter blankness, cannabis got me there much faster than anything else.
This is something I've thought about a lot. And it occurred to me because I'm a Gemini, so I do a lot of mental work, and I think some days where I'm like really grinding on a problem and I put the effort in to grind and grind and grind and grind and grind. And then at the end of the day, I smoke a little bit, it's like all the grinding I did, it gave like my unconscious, like a lot of material to work with, and then when I take the break and let it, like my energy go solve it, I have these amazing insights,
Yeah.
And I equate it to athletes. We train and 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 train, but sometimes our minds don't give us access to that training. And then if we can clear our minds, we actually get access to all of the work we put in.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Libra scales, right? This is part of why our tagline at HIGHSMAN is spark greatness, because it's the balance between the train, and then the permission to allow yourself to let go and allow your training to show up, you know,
Right.
to show up. That's fascinating. So for me, because of my the way my history played out, I really wasn't in a position to really consume before a game or before practice, because as soon as I became a cannabis consumer, I was in the NFL's drug program, which meant I was getting tested for 9 times a month. Okay. So
that's a lot of pee.
Yeah, exactly. So my experience with consuming cannabis was recovery. And it really, like when I first popped the drug test, I was like, I'm not that much of a smoker. I don't care. I'll stop, And then the season went on and I was like, I didn't realize it before, but the season went on and I was like, if I can't smoke, I'm not doing this shit, And so I had to find a way to use it to recover, and just to free my mind and not get tied up in knots and to allow my body to relax. And so for me, the way I used it, it was all about recovery. And what I found out was the anti-inflammatories and the opioids that they give us, are really more about numbing us, or hiding the inflammation, pretending the inflammation isn't there because we have a pill to do something about it. Okay. Exactly. And in your consciousness, that doesn't create a healing perspective, because inflammation it hurts, but it's a good thing because it means the body is healing. Yeah. And so I realized when I consumed cannabis, it wasn't about, sometimes I even became more aware of where the discomfort was, very often. Right. But it allowed me to send my breath, my energy, love, anything, right? To send energy there so that it can facilitate the process of recovery, and just, I've studied Ayurveda, I've studied Chinese medicine. And so most of these systems that are herbal based, they're all preventative, Yeah. If you stay in, and basically they're all saying, if you stay in tune with yourself, even when you start to get out of balance a little bit, you recognize it and you address it then. In Chinese medicine, they say treating a disease or treating something after it's already here is like forging weapons after the war has already begun. So I think, the Western mindset, the Western allopathic medicine is beautiful for surgery, and keeping people, helping people, amputees. It's really, really good for this wartime, acute kind of, but as far as keeping people healthy, supporting people and thriving, it's not really built for that. Right. And I think if we're looking, even as we talk about medicinal marijuana, we have to realize the tradition it comes from, it's preventative. Right. And if I'm consuming on a daily basis and that's facilitating me being connected to source or spirit or myself, okay, that's the number one thing I can do to make sure I stay healthy. Right. Because if we feel life is meaningful, we have the vitality and the energy to face with the things that life brings to us.
It's interesting you say that. Something that was always taught to me for a young age was you can have all the talent in the world, but the best ability is availability. And for so long, I took that in a physical sense of take care of your body, eat right, train hard, stretch. But as I got older and kind of transferred out of sports, that much more applied to my mind. If I am not available to intake something else or give something else, then I'm not available. I have no abilities if my mind isn't available.
Yeah, I like that a lot, actually. It's like balance isn't everything being equal. Balance is having equal access to all things so that you can access it when you want to engage it. And it's funny, you mentioning the power of cannabis, especially in that format, in some of the research I've done on pharmaceuticals, because I hurt my back late in my teenage years breakdancing. So nothing professional, but still a fun time. And I was on max dose of ibuprofen for probably 8 years, 3,200 milligrams a day. Just, I knew my stomach and liver were going to have issues. And I saw this report coming out of the BBC out of Britain, where they had actually tracked, out there they call it paracetamol, but it's pretty much Tylenol. And they also tracked statins, which is an anti-cholesterol medicine. What they showed, which was one of the most unique phrases I've ever heard, was if you are on consistent anti-inflammatories, like the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories that are over the counter, and you use them enough where they are part of your biology, you can lose up to 35% access to your empathy. And it was such a weird, I've never heard scientists, or at least whoever was writing, speak relating that kind of cause to that effect. They looked at this one 5-year study of a guy on statins and said, based on what happens, and at least on the British side of things, if you take cholesterol medicine enough, it can increase your likelihood of dying a violent death by up to 60%. And I was like, but a violent death requires others. So what a weird way to speak about like the symptoms of medicine. And what they kind of said was more so the idea of what is reason, not logic. Because they said, well, if you're in pain and you're jacked up on painkillers and somebody else is in pain, are you going to be able to empathize? No, you're just going to tell them to take some pills just like you're on, because the pills don't stop the pain. Like you'd mentioned, they just delete your ability to have it travel to your brain as violently or as passionately or whatever you want to call it. It just feels like there's less, but your body's still experiencing that. So it just disconnects you. And as a result of disconnecting from your body, it also disconnects you from being able to perceive others with the same level of one-to-one equality. And then on statins, they said it reduces cholesterol, but it takes it from your whole body, not just from your blood vessels. And cholesterol is one of our communicating chemicals, just like sodium. It's our brain is mostly fat and the gray matter. So as it removes cholesterol from your brain, ideally it's fraying the wires on your telephone, and you're not communicating with yourself as well. So they said, especially in Britain with hooliganism and soccer games, that means this old dude who's heavy set and on statins is more willing to go and fight you after a football game because his brain is short circuiting right to emotion. He can't afford the reasonable thinking that would say, maybe not tonight. Maybe that guy's got a weapon. Instead, you're just going to be like, fuck you, I'm coming at you because we lost, go team. And because of this, the medication only measuring your cholesterol, not the effect on the system. And so it's kind of interesting because in the same way, I just read a study about cannabis, hyper offensive to me, but I like to read into it, where a scientist was looking at the oral microbiome and said cannabis users have a specific bacteria that is way heightened in their mouths over users of tobacco and cocaine. For some reason, were the two that they were testing with it. But they said this specific bacteria, A. maiori, creates Alzheimer's. And to me, the offense was, did you guys not look at the massive amount of information talking about how THC and CBD also scrub the plaque from the brain, which causes Alzheimer's? So you're studying the mouth, but you're not looking at the effect. And so, of course, it was easy to click on because they're like, cannabis causes Alzheimer's. I'm like, it actually fights it. But why would they say that? Because they're only just testing teeth and gums. They're not actually looking at what happens when it goes into the rest of your body. And I thought the same, like, boy, it's going to take years to dig out from under this, as every news media source is just going to always, right, try to prefer the stigma, which is easy to sell. But it was interesting just to see medicine being considered. When you consider it holistically, it never sounds as good as when you're just talking about my knee hurts or my elbow's in pain.
Guys, this was great. I feel like we, feel like you touched my soul. Yeah. Seriously, like, I try to work on being more myself and being more authentic. And, when you feel around friends and you're comfortable, I think it makes it easier for me. So thank you guys for your vulnerability and playing my astrology game. This was great.
It's a phenomenal time to have with you, Ricky. We thank you for your time. As I said, I run a thing on the side. I might hit you about that because Best Human Project, it's just this. It's just a lot of hacking brains and trying to understand life without having to only use logic, but use every tool we have for it. Now, given we are here for cannabis, we all have been just jawing about it the whole time, but especially for anybody who didn't know, Ricky's home brand, HIGHSMAN Cannabis, is a phenomenal thing. We have it here in PA, so you could just check your local dispensary if you wanted to. But I know that you guys are trying to expand, especially beyond that. So I'd say keep your eyes to, I believe the website is HIGHSMAN.com, HIGHS man.com. So please, anybody who's out there, spend some time looking at it. If you like this kind of conversation, then I believe you're going to find things that you especially like through that vector. I think this is exactly where cannabis needs to go, right? It's about the human element, not just the profitability, not just the passion. It's what it does for us. So with that all being said, Ricky, I want to thank you again for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah,
thank you to have you on the show. Any parting words from either of you out there before we send off? Always like to
this was great. Yeah, I look forward to the next time.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, Ricky.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, thanks everybody who's listening for joining us today as well. be sure to check us out at uschamberofcannabis.com or on Instagram at uschamber. We are there as well. But that's all we have for you today. As you can tell, there's a lot more we'll talk about later. So until next time, everybody, from the professor, Mac, and the man they call Ricky, be sure to grow knowledge, extract truth, and just take it easy, everybody. Smoke weed every day.